welcome to this session on PCI Security program design, bridging theory and practice. We know that PCI Security is quite a complex endeavor, and success is best achieved by design, not by luck. And it requires quite a bit of management, active, ongoing management. And that means lots of communication, lots of planning, collaboration, coordination of various different entities, ongoing performance management. And we know that the management is best executed in the form of a program, not a single project, but a collection of projects working together towards a similar program goal. Now, what mostly depends on the success of the actual program? How do you make sure that the program itself meets the objectives? And that is by design. How you structure the work to be done, getting the right work done in the right order in your program. And that's what we will look at today. Now, I want to give you a bit of background as well. As I'm going to introduce to you 5 management models that will simplify the way in which you can improve the planning, the design, and the execution of your PCI Security program. And that is based on experience over 20 years. So I'm Ciske van Oosten. I'm the Global Business Intelligence Manager at Verizon. And my history in payment security dates back many years to 1996, when I was a police detective investigating payment card frauds. 6 years after that, I actually helped the major card brands to set up what became the PCI Security regulation, and I established the world's first QSA organization. And that was followed by about 2,600 PCI DSS assessments, which I personally conducted. And looking at all of those thousands of organizations, understanding the patterns, what goes into doing the right work, getting the right work done. And over the past 14 years, my team and I, we studied thousands of organizations to look at exactly how do they approach compliance. What goes into the methods that they implement, what works well and what doesn't work well. And we published those findings in the Verizon Payment Security Report and various articles. And it's the result of that deep insight that these 5 models came about on program design that I will show you. Now, in this short presentation, I really want to just focus on what are the common program design mistakes that organizations make. How do you measure PCI Security program success? The importance of a sensible goal. Earlier today in the keynote address, we heard about how important it is to define a clear goal and then to really get yourself motivated to achieve that goal. And we'll look at that as well in the context of PCI Security program management. And then also what is quite important is there are many constraints related to PCI Security compliance, and how do you identify the most important constraints, and also how do you overcome them? Now, there's a lot that goes into PCI Security compliance management, and organizations do benefit from a roadmap. And as you can see on this slide, here are 5 key milestones that you can include in a roadmap. This is quite common, and the most important first milestone is the correct interpretation of the requirements. That is a very logical first step. And that is followed by identifying the capacity you need, the resource requirements to implement the controls to meet PCI DSS 4.0. So that is step number 2. After you've done that, you're actually setting yourself up for being able to identify the gaps, pinpointing exactly the differences between where you are today with very likely version 3.2.1 of PCI DSS, and where do you need to be in the future to meet PCI DSS 4.0 requirements. Once you identify the gaps, obviously you need to remediate them, and after that, milestone number 4 is to gather the compliance evidence and to evaluate the quality of the evidence. Because remember, with version 4.0, the requirements for PCI Security compliance evidence has been raised to a higher level. So you need to understand how well are you prepared for your first formal compliance validation on 4.0. So the last milestone is your formal validation assessment. But this is just a roadmap. This is not a program. There's so much more that goes into a program. You need to have funding. You need to have business support to actually execute this. So you cannot call a roadmap a program. And that's what I will show you as well in the next coming slides. We will look at program design and performance. What exactly are the expectations, both from the organization, from your own business, the expectations on your security and compliance teams versus the reality. So the first expectation, if you consider PCI DSS has been around for, well, next year, 2024, it will be exactly 20 years since PCI DSS version 1.0 was introduced. And you would expect that most organizations today have repeat compliance assessments. So they repeat it year after year, and you would expect that they actually succeed with their compliance validations the first time. The second expectation is that the work assignments for the compliance teams result in the right work getting done, that people know how to focus, that they don't spend time spreading themselves thin and doing work that doesn't relate to the goal. Number three is that the participants in your program aim to achieve the same overall goal, that they have the same sense of direction. And number four is that the team know how to design a program to be economical. That is quite important because PCI security compliance programs cost money. You need to do it very efficiently. You need to avoid waste. And where effectiveness is getting the right work done, efficiency is getting work done in a better manner. And the fifth expectation is that the team, whether it's your risk management, your security and compliance teams, however they are set up, that they are capable of doing work in the right, correct order, that they don't do things in a very inefficient manner, jumping around. We know that there's a lot of dependencies within PCI programs. Now let's look at practice. In practice, we know that very few organizations, despite having repeat PCI DSS assessments year after year, manage to succeed in getting all the controls in place and having it in place by the time that they do their formal validation assessment. Over all the years that we've tracked PCI security compliance since 2008, when version 1.1 of PCI DSS was active, we've seen that on average, less than 50% of organizations actually manage to maintain all of their security controls. So when they do their final validation assessment, multiple controls are found to be not in place and needs to be remediated. The reality at point number two is that the assigned program tasks often do not contribute towards the goal. People are very distributed in their attention. They are spread rather thin, and they don't really focus on the right tasks. Number three is an articulated PCI security goal statement is seldom communicated. I mean, just imagine your own PCI security programs. Do you have a clearly articulated goal that truly captures the intent of PCI DSS? And we know that with version 4.0, the standard has moved towards an intent-based standard to truly understand how to protect payment card data effectively and reliably over extended periods of time. The reality at number four is insufficient attention in program design. How much attention do organizations actually give to designing programs? What goes into the structure? How the work is actually delivered? And at number five is project management and program management. There's a lot of deficiencies there as well in terms of the skills on how do you achieve the critical paths and critical chains in project management to make sure that you execute it efficiently. Now, there are five more expectations. There at number six is that the team, you would expect them to know how to define and execute the security strategy. And we've heard it for many years. PCI security compliance needs to be strategic. You need to be proactive. You need to allocate scarce resources towards prioritized objectives so that you can achieve the correct goals. And you do not want to be tactical and reactive. So that's the expectation. Another one is that the requirements and the success factors, the necessary conditions that need to be in place, are sufficiently communicated that you know how do you break down the goal into objectives and how do you achieve them. And then also to understand the cause and effect relationships between the processes, the people, the technology, and the documentation, because there are many different relationships and you need them all to work together. And then also the expectation is that teams know how to identify which constraints and core conflicts within the program exist, and how do you identify the most important constraints. And then at number 10, how do you actually remove or reduce those constraints? Now, in reality, what we see over the past 20 years, PCI security strategies are usually very poorly defined, if at all. I mean, how often do you see a well-defined security strategy document? Success factors are usually only partially known and not sufficiently analyzed to truly understand what are the critical success factors and what are the conditions to meet those success factors. And at number 8, teams are inefficient and they experience delays in getting the right work done. And that is also partially also as a result of lack of focus, because you spread yourself so thin, you have so many demands on your time. Management attention is probably one of the scarcest resources that exist, is because you need to focus on so many different aspects. At number 9 is that the reality is that people work on constraints that are really not important. You would imagine that there are many constraints, maybe there are hundreds or even thousands of constraints that can impact the throughput and performance of your program. But also in reality, we know that only a few of those constraints truly matter, and I'll get to that in a bit in this presentation. At number 10, teams often lack a proven method for reducing and removing the constraints. You know that the constraints exist, we'll get to the constraints in a minute. Well, whether it's time or budget, etc., but how do you actually identify which constraints to work on, which ones to reduce, and which ones you can completely eliminate? So that is the reality. Now, in terms of the common mistakes that organizations make with PCI security program management, is that there's usually, in many cases, there's no design. Organizations say, we need to do PCI security compliance. PCI DSS 4.0 exists. It's a 360-page document. Let's read the document and go for it. We just implement the missing requirements and hope for the best. And that is not the best approach. But we know that over the past 20 years, a lot of organizations do have some form of design of their programs, but it's often inefficient. The focus is either too narrow or the focus is too broad, where there's so much that it overwhelms the teams and they don't know exactly what to focus on. At number 3, the outcomes are often not effective. Because you know that we don't do PCI security compliance for the sake of compliance. We do it for the data to be protected effectively, reliably, over long periods of time. So that is quite important, is you need to make sure that your program design is all geared towards effectiveness. And number 4 is also it must be efficient. So a common mistake as well is inefficient execution of the program. And that is most likely, as I mentioned before, program management skills and project management skills. There's a lot of dependencies between tasks. You need to know what to start with, how the workflows will interact with one another, and have those critical paths and critical chains mapped out. And then the last one is unsustainable performance. We see that quite often, is that the PCI security program doesn't support sustainability. And what we mean with sustainability is it's unrealistic to expect that a program will result in PCI DSS controls being in place all of the time, 24/7, 365 days a year. There will always be some controls that fall out of place. That is reality for every organization out there. So in the 20 years that I've done PCI security compliance, I've never seen an organization that had no control fall out of place ever throughout the year. It happens. But what we are saying is that you must have the ability to rapidly detect and correct controls that fall out of place. It must be sustainable. And for the program to be sustainable, you need to have the capacity, the resources to do so. So those are the common program mistakes. Now let's look at how do you measure the success of a PCI security program. That's quite important as well. Begin with the end in mind. If you remember that book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you need to understand what to aim for. So there are 3 quotations there. The first one is, it's not the daily increase, but the daily decrease. Hack away at the unessential. And that is from Bruce Lee, that late famous actor and martial artist. Second quotation is, one reason so few of us achieve what we truly want is that we never direct our focus. We never concentrate our power. That is the motivational speaker, Tony Robbins. And then the third quotation, tell me how you will measure me, and then I will tell you how I will behave. If you measure me in an illogical way, don't complain about illogical behavior. And that is from the late Eli Goldratt, the creator of the theory of constraints and the logical thinking process. So this hopefully just captures what goes into making a PCI security program successful. So essential PCI security program designs outcomes. The program, how do you measure it? It must be effective, it must be strategically aligned, efficiently executed, sustainable performance, ongoing capability improvement. So you need to get the right work done for it to be effective. You need to understand how your strategy is also supporting the overall business strategy, because the better aligned security and compliance strategy is with the business strategy, the more the business will support security and compliance. And then sustainable performance is integrated lifecycle management, ongoing capability improvement is quite important as well. You need to be able to improve your capabilities and not just regress. So the goal of PCI Security, this is how we've defined it since about 2014. The organizational goal of a PCI Security compliance program is to develop, maintain, and continuously improve a mature control environment that offers reasonable assurance for the effective ongoing security of payment card data in a consistent and predictable as well as sustainable manner. And to achieve that goal, PCI Security Compliance Program is integrated with and supported by additional security, risk management, and governance frameworks, a security operating model, strategy, and a business model. So those are the elements. You don't have to have the same goal statement, but it gives you a good baseline on what you're aiming for. Now, I've mentioned the constraints. We've categorized it in these 7 constraints: capacity, competence, capability, commitment, communication, culture, and cost. So in the English language, they start with the letter C by coincidence, so we call them the 7 Cs. But this is a good way to understand how can you identify the most important constraints. So the program design and performance, I would just briefly show you the 5 management models that are published in a paper. I'm not going to go into detail. Don't worry too much about the small text, just focus on the middle column here. So there are 5 models. The top ones are the 2 governance models. You've got the security management canvas and the GRC squared model. You've got the lifecycle management models and the control design template. So let's just briefly look at each one of them. The security management canvas is a fairly recent model. I think we introduced that in 2018 and 19, but it really gives you perspective of the overall work to be done. And you can see that on pillar number 5 is the program. And the program is preceded by 4 other pillars that gives input to make the program successful. So the text in this model just shows you which documents should exist for security management. It really helps you to give that rich perspective. It's quite a powerful model. Now, the next one is quite simple, the GRC squared model. It's just your governance, risk management, and compliance are usually siloed, and you want to bring them together. So that's really just on you sit around a table and you need to have conversations. And how you bring it together is by understanding the goals, the requirements, and the constraints for governance, risk management, and compliance. So quite a powerful model. Good to read that one. And then lifecycle management. This can be applied whether you're new to PCI compliance or whether you have a compliance program that exists for many years. We've seen organizations that have 5 or 10 years of PCI compliance miss essential steps. You can see that one of the first steps is to have a program charter to understand the risks of the program and the assumptions. And a lot of organizations don't even have a well-defined program charter. So this is a very good model to evaluate which are the critical steps that you should not miss for your program. We also have security control lifecycle. That's been introduced in 2016. So security controls also have life cycles. They don't just fall out of the sky. We know that we have a defined list of controls in PCI DSS 4.0, as well as you can customize controls. But every control has a beginning, it has a conception, and it has a decline and retirement. So there are 9 stages. So this really helps you to understand the flow of controls and through their life cycle. And the last model is the security control profile or the template. And what is interesting is these are 12 key elements that should be documented for at least for your critical controls, but perhaps even for every control in PCI DSS. And this applies to both defined controls as well as customized controls. And 8 out of these 12 elements that I list here actually are referenced in PCI DSS 4.0. So a lot more details in the paper. The paper was published in August this year, so it's very recent. It's about a 30 pages read, so fairly quick read. You're welcome to download it. I also have hard copies here if some of you would like to receive and read hard copies. So you're welcome to read that at your leisure. Now, just to wrap up, an effective program management approach. How do you improve the way in which you manage PCI compliance? First, purpose before planning. Start with why. What exactly are you trying to achieve? What are you aiming for? Break that down into intermediate objectives. So you've got the goal, you've got intermediate objectives to achieve the goal. What are the requirements to meet the objectives? So the necessary and sufficient conditions for the requirements, and then the constraints. What are the constraints on the requirements? Once you have that top layer in place, that is the actual scope and impact of a PCI security program. Now you can actually develop your strategy, a sound strategy, and so the strategy helps you to have a focused allocation of resources. The program, which follows next, is the execution of the strategy. And after the program, it allows you to have continuous re-evaluation and improvement. So hopefully this gives you a very good idea how to conceptualize a mental model for improved PCI security program management. Thank you very much.